Well, thank you all for coming out. This is very exciting for me. I'm exceptionally jet lagged, so hopefully you can bear with me if I just fall asleep in the middle of this talk. Hopefully it's not that boring. I want to thank quickly Robbie and Mark and everybody countless volunteers and everybody at OneUp for bringing me out here and putting this conference on. It's very exciting as an American to come to any European conference and talk with you all, because I love to have face-to-face time with all of you all. So we're gonna talk about Kickstarter today. Let's see if I can make this thing work. Oh my God, I did it. I'm so proud of myself. Cool, so who am I? Hi, my name is Anya. I am the senior games outreach person at Kickstarter. And so what does that mean? So my job is to speak to all of you wonderful, amazing game creators and see how I can help set you up with the tools and tricks and information in order to help fund your Kickstarter project. I don't do development, I don't do marketing, I don't do some of these more like traditional game dev roles, so I sort of work in a really unique space. This is my 11th year in games, which is really exciting. It doesn't feel like a long time, and yet it sometimes feels like a lifetime. I got my start in Flash games at AddictingGames.com. I can't really see any of you, so I don't know if this is going to work, but who here has heard of AddictingGames.com? I see like one hand. Cool, awesome, that's going well. But basically, if you have made a Flash game, I most likely have chatted with you at some point. I love Flash games. I'm always happy to talk about Flash games, so if you see me awkwardly hanging out after this and you want to chat Flash games, I'm happy to talk to you. My role there was developer relations, so similar to what I do now, speaking with creators, really getting involved in that sort of creative process, which is much more what I am interested in. I like to work with creators. I like to see what are your needs before you even think about them. So I'm very lucky to be doing that in the capacity of Kickstarter. So what is Kickstarter? Again, I can't really see you all, so this is going to be interesting. Instead of asking who here has heard of Kickstarter, who here has not heard of Kickstarter? I don't think I see any hands, so I guess that means we're doing a good job. But quickly, Kickstarter's mission is to bring creative projects to life. So if you are interested in games, if you are interested in music, if you're interested in food, we have 15 separate categories on Kickstarter.com that you can search for that have tons of really incredible creative projects. We'll highlight that games is a significant part of the website, which is really cool, but there still are 15 different categories. One of the categories that is my weirdly favorite, just because I think it's kind of fun on there, is fashion, because people come up with some very interesting ideas in the world of fashion. So we do this by connecting people to the projects that they love. Again, video games, music, art, film, dance, design and technology. There's a lot of fun, cool stuff on there. And we like to think that we do this better than anyone. Kickstarter is also a benefit corporation. If you're not familiar with what a benefit corporation is, they are for-profit companies that are obligated to consider the impact of the decisions that we make and not just our shareholders. So not to get too controversial, but in the video game space, right, when we're looking at what's happening at some of the AAA spaces, specifically I'm thinking of the big announcement that happened recently with Activision and Blizzard, where the shareholders had much more of a stake in what was happening than the actual people behind the company. We are very lucky that we don't have to think about that in that sense. We think about what will support, serve, and champion the artists and creators that we work with, especially those working in less commercial areas. We also donate 5% of our annual profits to arts and music education. So it makes coming to work really exciting and rewarding. And just a quick note, the background image here is a little difficult to see, but that background image is actually the library at Kickstarter headquarters. The library is also where the games team works out of. So if you're ever in Brooklyn, New York, where we are located, and you want to come by and check out our really, really cool warehouse, send me an email and you can come check out what we have out there. People from nearly every country on Earth have backed a project. It's a huge community. Our community actually represents nearly every country and all 7 continents, including Antarctica. So somewhere, someone in Antarctica is like, gotta make that travel jacket and put it on Kickstarter, which is really cool. I did a little bit of digging, and 32 successful game projects have actually come out of Belgium, which is really cool and super exciting. Kickstarter has the largest and most engaged funding community. We have 15 million people that have backed a Kickstarter project. This is within the almost 10 years that Kickstarter has existed. This year, we're celebrating our 10-year, I guess birthday. Anniversary seems like an incorrect term, but we'll be turning 10 years old this year, so we're a full decade. So in 10 years, 15 million people have backed Kickstarter projects, which is really cool. There's also 50 million pledges that have been made to all projects on Kickstarter in our almost 10-year lifespan. And I'll make a quick note about that 15 million figure. Of that 15 million, 5 million have backed more than one project. So it's a good chance that if you're coming to Kickstarter and you've backed one project, you're most likely going to back another, which is really cool. It's very rewarding to know that people can search for things in different categories and continuously engage within the community. Kickstarter backers have already pledged 3.6 billion euro in the lifespan of Kickstarter. This has helped fund over 157,000 creative projects. And there's a significant amount of this money pledged that comes to games. So, quickly, our games category stats specifically. 852 million euro have been pledged to Kickstarter games. That's huge. In 2019, we're anticipating that about $1 billion will be pledged to games. So if you've pledged to a Kickstarter project in our 10-year lifespan, you are part of this, so thank you. 16,000 successful projects have been funded in games. That's a lot of projects. Again, 32 of those come from Belgium, which is really cool. And there are roughly 3 million backers in the games category. So when we talked about those 15 million people that have pledged to a Kickstarter project, 3 million of those 15 million have pledged specifically to games. There's a lot of people looking for games on Kickstarter. So we don't like to necessarily look at things in like a video game versus tabletop game perspective, but I think it's important to highlight the two really, really successful parts of Kickstarter. So over 2 million euro have been pledged to video games. That's really, really impressive. And 12,000 projects have launched in the video games category, and there are 1.6 million backers in video games. It's a lot of people. So these are very impressive numbers, but when we look at the tabletop category, 568 million euro pledged to tabletop games. When I started my job at Kickstarter, I was hired on as like sort of the video games person, and I didn't really know this tabletop community existed. And I've been at Kickstarter just over 3 years, and I've kind of fallen in love with this really incredible tabletop community. The creators are fantastic. The people that play the games are even more wonderful. So I highly encourage you, if you haven't had the opportunity to check out any tabletop games, definitely do it. They're really cool. 18,000 projects have launched in tabletop and 1.6 million backers in total. I'd make a quick note here because if we look at our video game stats, did it go back? There we go. I just didn't click the button correctly. So we have 1.6 billion backers in video games, and we have 1.6 million backers in tabletop games. But there are actually more people that back video games projects than there are tabletop projects. The tabletop community is coming after video games, so we gotta kind of hold them off a little bit. I wanted to highlight games of 2018 because we had a really incredible year. Thanks to everyone, and also thanks to anybody that has backed or launched a Kickstarter project in 2018. 178 million euro pledged to games, all of games, in 2018. That's actually up 18% from 2017. We also had just over 3,000 projects funded, which is also more projects that funded from 2017, and 868, I'm so bad with numbers. We had that many backers. So we had just under 1 million backers in 2018. That also is up about 100,000 more backers in 2018 than in 2017. So games are huge on Kickstarter. There's a thriving community that's consistently backing and consistently launching. So we're really excited going into 2019 to see what people are going to bring to Kickstarter. So we've seen all these numbers, and we might be asking ourselves, cool, what actually makes a good project on Kickstarter? Are there tricks? Are there tips? Is there like a special sauce that I need to do? And I'm here to give you some of that information. So, when we're looking at good projects, there's a handful of things that we tell people, yes, you want to do this. Number one, specifically for video games, you need to show your gameplay. It's just imperative. You need to show your gameplay in your main project video, and you need to show the gameplay throughout the page. You can do that through things like GIFs or even just still images, but in your video, again, I can't really see any of you, but I'm sure that you're all beautiful, wonderful people. I don't want to see your face in your Kickstarter video right in the beginning. I might want to see that later. But you need to be able to show at least 30 seconds of gameplay. And speaking of your video should be short. You want to have 30 seconds of gameplay in the beginning. You want to have 30 seconds explaining who you are. And you want to have 30 seconds explaining why you're coming to Kickstarter. When I say showing who you are, that doesn't necessarily mean that you need to show your face, because I also understand some people are private and are not comfortable showing themselves on camera, which we totally respect. But it can be something as simple as a website, a Twitter handle, something to show who you are and why you're coming to Kickstarter. So you might say, well, because money. True. But why do you want people to be a part of this with you? What is it that you're hoping to accomplish? Do you want to finish your game? Do you want to update your art? Do you want to finish a level? What is it specifically that you're trying to do? The third thing is community building. And truthfully, community building can be its own presentation in itself. And actually, if anyone is going to Covadis in April, I'll be doing a quick talk about community building and how to really build a community within your Kickstarter project. But here, quickly, the abridged version. What is community building? Community building is having a community of people that basically say, we want to participate in this with you. We want to be part of this project. The easiest way to do that is through things like social media, so Twitter, Facebook, Reddit, anywhere where there's a gathering of people that are interested in the thing that you also want to make. I'll make a quick note about that, though, for things like Twitter and Facebook. They're a very interesting place to be on the internet, but because of the algorithms that they currently have, a lot of stuff gets buried. So while it's a good place to, kind of showcase things, I think one of the best ways for people to really manage their community is Discord. Discord is an incredible place to make sure that the things that you need people to hear are located in a specific space. You can do things like Teaser Tuesday, where you come in and chat with your community for 2 hours. There's endless things that you can do. But also with community building, what you're doing right now is community building. You're participating in the process by coming to an event where a community of like-minded folks who are interested in games are talking to each other. The easiest way, if you're just starting from base one to do that, is to have a piece of paper and a pen. Have people write their information down. That's essentially the beginning of a newsletter. You can always go home and put that into Google spreadsheets or MailChimp or these various other ways to continue that sort of growing process of a newsletter. But just having a piece of paper and a pen, you're more likely to actually remember people. Because how many times do you come to events and you're like, oh yeah, I'm gonna remember that, and then something else happens, or you get a phone call or a tweet, or in my case, our ridiculous president does something, so everybody forgets about what's happening. We've talked about gameplay, we've talked about our video, we've talked about building a community. Your main project image. So I said in the beginning, again, I'm sure you're all beautiful, amazing people. I don't want to see your face on your project video to begin with. Your main project image should really highlight what your game is. What's a still that you're most proud of? That's what you should highlight. And we'll go into what it makes a good project image and what makes a bad project image a little bit later. The fifth thing is, I think, one of the most important, and this is being honest. I have a lot of conversations with people who say, Kickstarter projects they just don't deliver. And it's one of the most frustrating conversations that I have to have because the reality is that's not a true statement. Yes, people get burned. Yes, sometimes projects don't come out. But the vast majorities of these projects actually do deliver. There was an independent study done in 2015, and the information is available on Kickstarter.com. And if you're interested in reading the study, I'm happy to send that to you. But the study found that about only 9% of projects don't deliver. And boiling it down even further, the number of people who quote, take the money and run is exceptionally rare. Of that 9%, one of the main reasons projects didn't deliver is because of dishonesty and miscommunication. I completely understand if you have to tell your backers in your community, we're not going to deliver on time, there's a development delay. But the reality is, development delays happen. And if you're honest about it and you tell people what's happening, they're most likely to really be forgiving. So be honest. And 30 to 35 days. So we've done a little bit of research on this, and it seems as though anything less than 30 days for your project is not enough time, and anything over 35 is too much. So if you're thinking to yourself, oh, I'm just gonna run a 60-day project because I can get all this money and all these pledges and all this community building. Unfortunately, that tends to backfire. People can get bored. 60 days is also a very long time. And you have to keep in mind that 60 days of you still doing community building, engaging with your community, updating your project, that's a lot of work. So you don't want to give yourself too much work, quite honestly. There's 3 other quick things that I did want to mention that I didn't put up here, but they're worth mentioning. Project updates. It's super important to update your project. We tell people that you should update your project every other day, roughly. And this, to me, is one of the cool things about Kickstarter, is with these 15 different categories, there's kind of these small rules for each category that are unique to each specific category. So for example, our director of music told me recently that she tells her music community that they only need to update maybe once a week at most. And I was like, are you kidding me? If a games creator did that, we would have a riot. You do need to update. I would think about it in these terms. The people behind games, your backers, it's a huge, thriving community. And they want to know what's going on with you. They want to be part of that process. It's sort of like not hearing from your friend for a month and being concerned about what's happening. It's sort of the same thing. A trick with updates, though, is if you're launching your project before you launch, try to have 3 to 4 updates already planned out. And updates don't necessarily need to be a novel. It can be just a couple sentences about what's going on. It could be a picture of what you did that day. It's really about sort of putting a little bit of personification into what you're doing as a creator. Responding to comments. Again, this goes back to community building. I think at some point I actually do want to look at all of the emails that I've sent in my 3 years at Kickstarter and see how many times I use the words community building, because I think I use it more than my name, quite honestly. But you want to respond to comments on Kickstarter. So it's pretty cool. You have the option to really engage with the backers in your comment section. So you can respond to every single comment that comes in. And it can get tedious, and it can get a little exhausting, but it's important to do. And the last thing that I would quickly mention is reaching out to other creators who have run projects. You most likely have a friend that has run a Kickstarter project. You can reach out to that person and say, hey, I'm thinking of running a project. Can you help me? Can you give me some inside information on what you did that worked? That's kind of its own community building in itself of building your creator network. So we've looked at the things that we should do. Let's look at the things that we shouldn't do. So the first thing is not having a video. You just need a video. That's necessary. Never posting an update. Well, what's going on? People want to know what's going on with you. Having a bad launch day. So we talked about 30 to 35 days being the ideal time frame to run a project. Well, when should you launch your project? There's a couple rules here. You don't want to launch your project on a Friday, a Saturday, or a Sunday. And the reason is the weekend is sort of reserved for people to catch up on things they didn't do throughout the week. So most likely they aren't going to be on Kickstarter looking for projects. So traffic is down, right? So you want to maximize the time that people are actually looking at Kickstarter. You also don't want to launch on any major US holidays, especially if you're targeting a US-based audience. So aside from the obvious Christmas, New Year's, things like that, we have a lot of holidays in the US. We have things like Martin Luther King Day. This Monday is actually President's Day, so most people have the day off. We have 4th of July, we have Memorial Day. It's just an excuse for Americans to drink and eat hot dogs, basically. But if you're asking yourself, I don't know what these holidays are, ask me. I'm happy to help. But you don't want to launch on these days. Okay, stretch goals. Let's have a quick conversation about stretch goals. You do not want to launch a Kickstarter project with stretch goals. You roll your stretch goals out when you funded. And there's a couple different reasons for this. Number one, you don't want to have stretch goals that you can't necessarily deliver. So I see this happen from time to time. People will launch a Kickstarter project and they'll put a stretch goal in for the Switch version or a PS4 version or an Xbox version. But they haven't done any of the planning to actually come out with those different cross-platform opportunities. So just don't do it. You want to have those conversations with Nintendo and Sony and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But the other thing that happens, unfortunately, is if you launch with a stretch goal that should just be part of the project, your community can turn on you. Your community can say, well, of course you need to have a Switch version. Why aren't you just asking for a Switch version? And your comments will just turn into this horrible place of people saying, you should have done this, you should have done this. Anything that should be in the stretch goal that should be in the project should just be in the project. This is sort of a weird space, and I'm happy to have personal conversations with anybody that has additional questions about stretch goals. Another thing that you don't want to do is, we call it press reliance. So we by no means are saying to anyone, just don't bother with the press. No, you should try to reach out to press. But the thing is, the days of launching a project and having a Kotaku article driving, hundreds of dollars of pledges just don't really exist anymore. And I see this happen a lot. People will say, I'll launch my project and the press will come, and it doesn't happen, and they're devastated. So this is why we tell people, again, build your community. The press is there. If you can get press again, great. Do it. That's totally fine. But don't rely on press driving a significant number of pledges. I would say if you can get 1% of pledges from press, that's success. And the last thing, touching on honesty again, is ghosting. You don't want to ghost anybody. You don't want to just run away because things got weird or things, you have bad news. It's better to deliver bad news than to have no news at all. So we know what to do, we know what not to do. And so let's say that you have a project and you did all of the things that we said, yes, do this, and you didn't do any of the things we said, don't do this. What if I fail? Huge question we get a lot. And this might seem a little bit strange, but I'll explain. There is no such thing as a failed Kickstarter project. There are projects that don't fund, but that's all they are. They're just projects that didn't fund. That doesn't mean that you failed. To me, the only time someone has failed on Kickstarter is if they've launched a project and they didn't learn anything. Because truthfully, I have a lot of people that come to us that say, oh yeah, my project didn't fund, but I met all of these people and I actually found a publisher even though my game didn't fund. So if you've run your project and you're like, this was a waste of time and I learned nothing, to me that's a failure. But if you built a community and you have people that have said to you, I want to back this, and it didn't happen your first time around, you can always relaunch. It's totally fine. There's no red mark or demerit if your project doesn't fund the first time around. It's totally okay. And now, here's the number one question that I get asked about Kickstarter. How do I get featured? So this is an interesting one. I'll give you things that we look for, and I'll explain how this process works. So this is a Project We Love badge. This is essentially a staff pick. Somebody says, I like this project. What we really look for on Kickstarter for projects that we are happy to feature, we look again for a strong project image. What does your project look like? What is your game? What are you presenting? We also look for gameplay gifts because it shows off the game, but also we can use some of these assets in order for us to do some of these promotions. The biggest thing, though, is you want to talk to us early and often. The games team has a little bit of leadway here where we can definitely help with Project We Love badges. We have a game-specific newsletter that goes out every other week that we manage. And if you go to kickstarter.com/games, which is the games homepage, we manage those features. The larger initiatives on Kickstarter, so things like our company-wide newsletters, so a happening newsletter, a Project We Love newsletter, or any sort of social media, homepage placement, things like that, this is all done through our editorial team. We are in constant communication with this editorial team. So if you talk to us, it makes it easier for us to advocate for you as creators to the editorial team. So talk to us early and often. Here is the number one thing that we don't want to see on your project image. These badges. We hate these badges. I can't stress that enough. Don't put them on your project. I've seen things like badges that are just launched or funded in 5 hours. It's completely unnecessary information. It's great, but save that for a project update. Your image needs to be clean, and it shouldn't have any badges or unnecessary text or images. The only text that should be on your project image is maybe the name of the game. Everything else can be left off. So we've looked at a lot of things that we can and can't do. We've talked about the numbers behind Kickstarter. So let's look at a couple projects that really highlight things that work. The first project I want to highlight is a project that I personally love, Boyfriend Dungeon from Kit Fox. This team is from Montreal, Canada. It's a dating sim dungeon crawler, and if you aren't familiar with it, the sort of shtick here is that you're able to date your weapon. It's very cute, it's very funny, it's very much the heart and soul of this team from Montreal. So this is an interesting project for a handful of different reasons. This was actually their second project on Kickstarter. Their first project that they ran in 2014 was a really cool game called Moon Hunters. So they had this existing community on Kickstarter based on their first project that was extremely successful. They were able to post an update to the backers of Moon Hunters and sort of announce Boyfriend Dungeon when they were ready to launch. They also spent a significant portion of 2018 leading up to their August launch in 2018, showing the game off to as many conferences at as many conferences as possible. So they were able to really build that community based on showing the game off. And it worked. So again, 30 to 35 day campaign, 31-day campaign. They made about €181, which was well over what they funded, what they had asked for. And they actually made about $65K more on this project. They also had just under 7,000 backers, and on Moon Hunters, they had about 6,000. And this is something that I think is really interesting about Kickstarter that we found, is the more that you run projects, the more your chances actually increase of funding. And that might seem a little bit strange, right? Like, but I've already exhausted my community. But the thing is, if you run a project and it's successful and it's funded, excuse me, and you come out with the project, you're essentially building trust. You're telling people, I can do this. You should believe in me. You should trust me. So people are more likely to come back. In addition to that, people are more likely to tell their friends and their community, hey, you should absolutely support this team. And I want to highlight something here, which I think is not a secret, but sort of a little untold thing about Kickstarter. So if we look at this graph, this is what you see. Oh, I can see you guys now. Cool. I should just keep this slide up. So when you launch a Kickstarter project, I'm going to put my little thing down. This is what you see in sort of the back end. And I want to highlight this curve here, right? So we start, oh boy. Didn't think about this. So we start here, they fund quickly on day one. This spike at the beginning of pretty much every project is with every project. You have an initial spike. And then you go into something that we call the project plateau, where your project might get a couple pledges, might get no pledges, but we don't really see any sort of like, heart rate monitor spikes or anything like that. And then if you look at the end, suddenly there's like a huge kind of spike there, right? Or I guess a significant spike. And there's a couple things that are happening here. One, we've talked about the 30 to 35 day sort of sweet spot, right? This is why we say 30 to 35, and this is also why we say do not cancel your project. I'll highlight a perfect example of this in I think 2 more games leading up, but there's a reason that spike happens at the end. I also quickly want to touch on this pie chart here, right? So this 30%, this green part of the pie, this 30%, these are all pledges that come in from Kickstarter. So that's people coming to Kickstarter and like searching for the game possibly, or just seeing it on a game's homepage, being highlighted in a newsletter, something that Kickstarter has done to drive those pledges. That means, however, 70% of these pledges have come in through the community that KitFox was able to build. This, again, highlights the importance of building a community on Kickstarter. It's just absolutely necessary. So the second game I wanted to highlight is actually from Belgium, a game called Sunset. If you're not familiar with this game, it's kind of similar to Gone Home or Dear Esther. I actually just finished Gone Home for the first time, and I'm completely obsessed. So if anybody wants to chat after, I'm happy to do that. One of the reasons I wanted to highlight this game, however, is I think that sometimes people think that Kickstarter video games specifically are for like, pixel platformers or like cute little RPGs. And Sunset, similar to Gone Home, is very much more of sort of an artsy game. So there's a space for any type of game on Kickstarter. If you have an FPS that you want to kickstart, cool, let's chat. We can figure that out. So we don't just exist for, cutesy sort of retro things, which are great. Don't get me wrong. But they did an incredible job. They overfunded. They brought in a huge community. They followed all of our rules, and they did an amazing, amazing, amazing job. The third project I want to highlight is this fantastic game out of the Netherlands by Trollbound Studios called Pine. It's super cool. So they actually reached out to me pretty early on in the process, and I was able to help them really kind of explain community building, and they did an incredible job. They did an absolutely fantastic job. Oh, geez. building their community. And as you can see, it paid off. They were exceptionally active on social media, especially Facebook. And Facebook ended up being a pretty big driver to them. They also posted 21 updates, which is about the sweet spot for posting updates. But as you can see, I mean, almost 4,100 backers from a pretty small team is exceptionally impressive. But here's the interesting thing about this project. Looks a little bit different from Boyfriend Dungeon, right? So here's what's going on with this. We still see this, we still see this spike right at the beginning, and we still have this project plateau. But what's going on at the end? Why did their project only fund in the last 4 days? How many people have clicked on the Remind Me button on Kickstarter? A handful of you. Okay, great, awesome. So this is what it looks like. There we go. So this Remind Me button is actually extremely powerful. What it does is the last 48 hours of a project's lifespan, it will trigger something in our system to send you an email to say, hey, there's 48 hours left in the project. Do you want to back it? And there's various reasons why people don't back a project on day 1 or 3 or 15. The number one reason I've heard is my rent is due. So, we completely understand financial constraints. So what ends up happening with this spike at the end is people who click on that Remind Me button come back and they back your project on the last couple days. So again, 30 to 35 days, don't cancel your project. They did an incredible job. Now you might be looking at this pie chart and saying, wait, but Boyfriend Dungeon was at like 30%. Why are they at 58%? Couple reasons. The biggest, however, that I want to highlight is I want to dispel a myth that if you get featured on Kickstarter, that means that your project will just automatically fund. That's not the case. We actually did significant promotions with this team because we just completely fell in love with the project. They got about a 20% increase of pledges based on Kickstarter giving them a number of promotions. But I think what this highlights is, again, the importance of bringing in an organic community into your project. It's kind of important. We talked about the Remind Me button. It's super cool. It's extremely powerful. But to highlight, I think, the biggest Kickstarter project out of Belgium, Divinity Original Sin. Mike's giving a talk at about 2, so definitely attend that talk from Larian Studios. So their first project, I mean, significant amount of money, huge backing numbers, and they did this in 2013, which was pretty early on in Kickstarter's birth. They ran their 30-day campaign. They also, however, posted 34 updates in the span of 30 days. It's a little bit of an overkill, but that's okay. Better to hear from people than not. And they actually don't hold the record of most updates posted in a day for video games. That was by Hyperlight Drifter, who posted 7 updates in 1 day, which was a lot. But because of the success of this first project, they were able to come back for their second project. And when we talk about updates and when we talk about people coming back, for their second project funding, if you come back, then you're most likely to fund your second time. They absolutely blew it out of the water with that. 1.8 million euro pledged on their second project. They almost they overly doubled their backing numbers. They did an incredible job. And here's one of the things that they did that was super smart. So they announced Divinity Original Sin 2 on their Kickstarter based on an update that they posted. And there's this thing that's really cool on Kickstarter. It's called a preview page. And you can send that preview page out to people before you launch so people can give you feedback. They posted this as an update and told their community, hey, we want to hear from you. Tell us what's going on. Super smart. You should absolutely do that. So this terrifying timer tells me I have about a minute left, so I'm going to do my best here. If I can leave you with anything, it's these 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 things. Number 1, build a community. Number 2, show your gameplay. Number 3, keep your videos short. Number 4, you do not need to fund on day 1. And number 5, come talk to us. How do you do that? You can go here. This is my email address, and you can also email games@kickstarter.com. That goes to the games team. Thank you all so much for coming out and hearing me blabble on about Kickstarter. I'll be around for the rest of the day, and I'll be at the Belgian Game Awards, so if you want to come say hi, I would love to talk to you. Thank you.